I think this is the most professional project that I have ever reviewed. All right, coming in 4 days ago, we have the final judgment on my game. What is this, Doomsday? Hi, Cherno. I've been your fellow for more than a year, and your C++ courses helped me to sharpen my C++ programming skills. Huge thanks. Now, starting from April, I finally made a step toward game programming by using Raylib library. Excellent library, by the way. I personally used Raylib for the first time like about a year ago. I remade my first game that I ever made in Raylib and in C++. I'll leave some videos linked up there if you want to see what that was like. And getting to practice all theoretical knowledge to work. Here is my second attempt to create a game, so we'll have a look at that. Link will be in the description below in case you guys want to look at it as well. And I happily open to any criticism in order to open my eyes on my flaws in programming. Okay, so basically roast me. The game is stupid simple, just like in original Snake game. Screenshots and GIFs are included in the README file. Yes! So I mentioned last code review that this is basically a requirement. I will admit, I started reading this email and kind of decided to make a video on it before I saw this line, so very happy so far. Plus I made Doxy documentation. So like using Doxygen for a Snake game. Bro, this guy's gonna please some development directors slash producers. Okay, so here we have the game. What are these? Snake 36, Snake 30? Are these like Jira numbers or like issue tracking numbers? What is going on? Okay, Snake Game C++ Australia. We got some emojis for like every dot point. That's fun. We got some documentation, unit tests, Kanban project management methodology using Jira, clean folder structure and make build automation. Yes, I appreciate that. Movable food for Snake, so it's a bit challenging. This is pretty intense. Clang for code formatting. I mean, that's not that intense, but we got actual GIFs here as well, or GIFs. What do you guys say, GIFs or GIFs? Let me know below. How to run the game Windows 2.17 megabytes. Okay, so this is one of those things that we will not be running if you've seen previous videos on my channel. We got some project structure documentation. Bro, what is this? Is this for real? This may be more professional than Hazel. I'm just kidding. We do this kind of stuff with Hazel as well. This is insane. This is like, I mean, just from this. Yeah, and here you can see like the ticket numbers. And they map to like the commits, I guess, the commit messages. 181 commits. 181 commits for a Snake game. I think this is the most professional project that I have ever reviewed. Like, this is, if you guys want any kind of like example of how we do things in the industry, and I say that with like maybe a slightly negative tint, because the reality is being a software engineer a lot of the time is very process driven and it's very bureaucratic. If you guys want to see a little bit of like a taste of what that's like, this repository may be the best thing we've seen so far. Now, I have no idea what the game is like. Obviously, I haven't played it yet, but this is intense. I'm kind of excited to take a look at the code. I'm hoping that the code quality like matches the project management quality. I know I'm spending a little bit of time here on the README, but I honestly, I'm just a little bit blown away by this. But I also will say that this is like one of those things where I reckon this took as long as the game, if not more. As someone who is obviously on like the actual software development side of all the disciplines working at a potential game studio or software company, I guess I can appreciate all of this stuff, although obviously I'm focusing more on the technical aspects of the actual code. Like, if this person has immaculate project management, but obviously the code is not up to par, like the code is the thing that I'm focusing on. But I could imagine like sitting in with like a producer or a development director or something like that, and them just being like, bro, you got to hire this person, like he is the best candidate for the job. So yeah, how important do you think this stuff is, like if you are looking to hire someone? So for someone looking for a job, if you saw this repository and this was a candidate and you were maybe in a hiring position, or at least a position to give some feedback, does this win major bonus points? Or is this kind of like, doesn't matter too much because you assume that a software engineer can adhere to whatever the practices of the team actually are? Let me know in the comment section below. Now, speaking of immaculate management and planning, next time you go traveling, make sure you check out Saily, the sponsor of this video. Saily is an eSIM service which makes international travel way easier. No more wasting time hunting for local SIM cards or dealing with insane roaming fees. I think mine is something like $10 a day. Instead, just install Saily once, pick a plan, and you're online in over 190 countries. When I'm traveling and need internet, which is every single time I travel, it goes one of two ways usually. Either I'm jumping from Wi-Fi to Wi-Fi, which of course is super annoying and not very reliable, or I'm trying to suss out who the best provider is for wherever I am that isn't super expensive. Then I have to find a store, give them all my details, take out my original SIM card, which by the way, a couple of years ago when I went to Germany, I ended up losing my original SIM card. So then when I got back home, I had to order a replacement one. Saley cuts all of that so that you can just enjoy your time wherever you are. I'm going to be going to Japan next month, and literally all I have to do is download the Saley app, find Japan, select a plan, and that's it. Use code the Cherno at checkout for an exclusive 15% off. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen to get started. Keep on top of your planning and have internet wherever you are. Thank you, Saley, for sponsoring this video. Okay, so here we are running the game through Visual Studio. It all built successfully, which is great. Before we spend any more time dissecting the intense quality, seemingly, of this project, let's just go ahead and play it and see what we get. Okay, so what he's done is he's actually got levels here. So you can see there's food eaten 1 of 3, and then I have to eat this food. And then as soon as I eat the food, there's like a pause, and then I transition into the next level, which is harder because there are more obstacles. And then I need to eat 5 foods. Okay, so there's level 2 done. It's getting harder. Now we've got 5 as well for this level. Anyway, I think we get the point. I don't know how long I'm gonna keep this up, but it definitely ramps up in difficulty. Oh, I just won. Okay, so there's 3 levels. Sure. Now, negatives already. Again, not resizable. Why does nobody make their game resizable? I mean, I kind of get it. You need to make sure that these art assets are appropriately sized. What if people use weird aspect ratios? You obviously have less control than if you just have a surface that's a fixed size/aspect ratio. There's also no icon, which to be honest, with the amount of time that has been spent making Jira tickets for this project, kind of thought you would have had an icon. So now, first of all, the verdict. Did it compile and run flawlessly the first time? Drum roll, please. No. As I mentioned, it did build. However, if I try and run it, this is what happened right out of the box. A white window, and if we look at the log, we can see that basically all of our assets failed to be loaded. Why? Well, this is, again, an issue that seemingly everyone has, which is to do with the working directory. So if we have a look at the working directory, by default, in Visual Studio, it's typically set to the project directory. CMake has a way to actually set the working directory correctly, but for some reason, this is something that I never see people actually utilize. If we have a look at where the project actually is, the project file gets put over here within the build directory. However, the assets directory is all the way back in the root directory, not inside this build directory. Now, of course, this is somewhat going to depend how you actually build CMake, but either way, the actual projects and all of the files in the CMake lists are within subdirectories from there anyway. So what I did to fix this is I just went back to solution directory, because solution directory was just right here inside the build directory that I made, and then back a directory. But this working directory stuff is definitely something that everyone needs to think about, because you just can't run the game without having your working directory set correctly. Okay, so now let's start diving into the code, having a look at the code, and also I'll mention some of the positive aspects about this whole build system. So first of all, it does in fact use CMake, but what I also really like is that you can see that the CMake lists within here inside the external directory will actually go and download Raylib for you at the appropriate version, which I am a huge fan of, because first of all, I didn't even have to recursively pull this. I think personally using Raylib as a submodule is totally fine. Using any dependency as a submodule is totally fine. However, I do think that this has a slight edge, and that is because unless you're modifying that dependency, so like an example might be you forked Raylib and you have your own branch maybe which has some custom additions or modifications, and then you want that, you kind of maybe want to have a more direct development link to that submodule, to that dependency. But if you're kind of treating it as this immutable thing that just like, I just need this dependency, I'm not going to change it, I need it at this particular version, then I kind of think this is superior. The same thing happens over here with the tests as well. We need catch 2 to do the unit testing, so we just get it And then after we've got it, we can actually run the tests using this cmakeLists file. So because this is actually over here, if we wanted to run the tests, we can just right click on unit test, for example, hit build. That will build catch2 along with the actual unit tests. And then over here inside all tests, this project is a utility project, meaning it doesn't actually compile any C++ code or anything. If we hit build, it will actually run the unit tests. And even though this is red, it says 100% tests passed with 0 tests failed out of 18. And here are all of the tests. And it's running this using the actual cmakeLists file that we just looked at, which uses catch2 to actually run the tests. So from like the build system point of view, I think this is excellent. Again, one of the best projects I've seen. If we have a look at the actual projects themselves, there are actually 3 of them. So there's snake main, snake renderlib, and snake corelib. These 2 are static libraries, with this of course just being the executable, which has our main function inside it. Is this a little bit overkill to modularize such a small game into like effectively 3 different modules? Yes, obviously it's not really helpful to the game in any way. However, it does demonstrate understanding of architecture for more complex systems. And you have to realize that even though I am definitely not a fan of over engineering in any capacity, education and kind of showcase / portfolio are 2 good examples of where over engineering may be necessary, because what you're doing is you're showing that you understand how things work at scale. If you are trying to get hired or show yourself as a more experienced programmer, then obviously it's beneficial to show that you understand how software project and architecture works outside of a simple case like a snake game, even though realistically a snake game might be the only thing you really have the resources to build, if that makes sense. And because of that, when I receive projects to code review, I try not to judge them as like, okay, this person's task and end goal is to make snake. Is the code and project that they've created, is that appropriate to that specific target and to that specific goal? That's a completely different ball game then like this is an example project that they've chosen. Doesn't really matter even what it is, because they want to demonstrate their knowledge and ability when it comes to programming to potential employers or team members, or really whoever it might be. Maybe they're just trying to make their dad who worked at Blizzard proud. So overall architecture, yeah, really good. I think they've done a good job. Whether or not separating the core lib from the render lib was a good decision, I don't know yet, because I don't know what code is within it. Main, I assume, is just basically like their launcher. I will quickly point out as well that the main reason to separate your code into different modules is usually either composition or reusability. So by composition, I mean you might only want to use a subset of the code available for a particular executable. In that case, it makes sense to put all of the kind of optional code that might not apply to every single executable target that you produce. It makes sense to put all of those into their own separate modules so that you can just select the ones that you want to use. The other side of this is reusability. You might have multiple projects that all need to use this snake core lib or snake render lib that aren't just part of this specific project. Kind of like a game engine. You might want to just write that code once and then use it for a whole variety of different things. In this case, you know, because it's all snake, it's probably not reusable across either different executables, different targets, or different projects entirely. However, again, showing that you understand what a static library is and how to kind of use different modules within your code is definitely beneficial. Okay, so let's finally get into the code. I'm sorry if I spent too long talking about the actual project, but because this project was so nicely put together, I kind of thought it deserved a little bit of the spotlight before we actually jumped into the code. Okay, so this is already quite a beefy main function for how modularized everything else is. Like for example, this creates a window, has the main loop, handles all the shutdown stuff. I kind of can't help but feel that this should have been part of the render library, like the window creation stuff. I mean, not necessarily. You could definitely classify like window creation as part of like the app layer, the application system. Once you actually create a graphics context to render to, you could say that that's part of the render system. However, the only thing this window does is create a render context so that we can render things to it. So a little bit weird. Handle menu state, handle game state, handle end state. So we clearly have a very simple sort of state machine where we have 3 different states. There's either menu, game, or game over or win. Either of those 2 would be handled by this default case over here. We pass pretty much everything into here. Now, immediately when it comes to architecture, this doesn't really match the level of what we have over here, which is a little bit confusing to me. What I don't like about this is that we basically have all of our actual important game state within this function, because you can see how we basically pass all of it into these functions, which are also inside the main file. And look at this. I mean, this does the drawing. Game UI draw background. This draw background function is actually inside the render module, as you can see, but everything else is inside Snake main, and furthermore inside the main.cpp file. What's also super weird is that we have another loop inside here. So these functions all have their own application loops. Then we've got one in here as well. That's a little bit weird. So how do we just like break out of this when we finish? Ah, I see. So this has a few different conditions. Yeah, not a big fan of this. So first of all, I think that this while loop is completely unnecessary. In fact, it's a little bit weird, because first of all three states, I can guarantee to you, they're going to do some drawing, especially if they happen to actually take over the entire code flow of the application by creating a pretty much endless while loop until the state changes. This is something that should be external to this function, as should like begin drawing, clear background white, and end drawing. All of this stuff, none of this stuff actually needs to be inside this function. If you have a look at the main function, we already have a while window should close, or game UI is game should close. We've already got that while loop. This should be your main game loop. When you start to introduce sub game loops for no reason like this, it just destroys like the flow of your code. Obviously not from like the code itself running, but from the developer experience of looking at this code and trying to make sense of it. Since we already have these conditions here, and within the loop, we switch on the game state and then redirect our flow to one of three functions. Inside here in the handle game state function, for example, when we look at this, we just simply do not need this while loop at all. These two conditions you can see are identical to what we have in our main while loop, but also the one thing that is different, where you might be like, okay, but it needs to do this, is it actually checking to see if the game state equals game. You know what else checks to see what the current state is and acts accordingly? The main switch statement. So obviously, somewhere within the actual while loop body, we're going to have something that modifies the game state. And you can see that if the game is game over, then we just set the game state to game over, which means we've introduced a state change, after which we will continue on end drawing, check this condition, go back, come up here to the top of the while loop, see that the condition is different, exit from this function, wind up over here, then come back up here to check if the window isn't closed yet, then look at the game state, and then we're like, oh, we're in game over or whatever. So we're gonna jump to handle end state, which, guess what, would have happened if we just simply didn't have this while loop. In fact, let me demonstrate something real quick. I'm gonna go ahead and comment out every single while loop that we have. Note that this one with handle menu state actually has another condition here, is paused, but I think we can ignore that for now. And then handle end state is also completely unnecessary. If I just run the game with those changes, look at that. We're playing the game, our states work, there's game over state works, we're back here. Everything works the same way, because this stuff was completely unnecessary and just added complexity to what I would call is a very critical part of our project, the main loop. The next issue with this is the fact that we have begin drawing and end drawing, as well as I guess game UI update probably has to happen every single time. Here it kind of seems to conditionally happen only if this is true. But either way, we have all of this stuff that is, again, repeated. I would just bring this stuff out over here and be like, okay, well, this is the main kind of rendering loop anyway. I mean, in this case, our update and rendering are kind of tied together, which for a small game like this is totally fine. Let's bring this stuff out here so that this can actually do the only thing that's relevant to itself. You want to keep your functions really lean and to the point, meaning instead of doing a whole bunch of different things for a specific function that says handle menu state, you know, such as setting up the entire graphics rendering context for the whole application, you just want it doing the actual stuff that's relevant to what it's supposed to be doing. And by moving your main rendering functions out here, you're making these functions way more specific to what they're actually supposed to be doing, which is a good thing. Another interesting thing that I've noticed is we have this game pointer, which is originally set to null, that's actually taken into these functions. So here's our new game, which we take in as a pointer reference, meaning we can actually modify the value of the pointer from within this function. And then that's actually responsible for creating it lazily. And then if the game's not paused, we're actually going to delete it if it already exists and then create a new one. This kind of makes me nervous when it happens within loops. The reason why is because very specific actions or events that need to happen like once, for example, putting them into loops with if statements that basically kind of ensure that they only happen once always feels sort of dodgy and unnatural to me. I think realistically, because from a code flow point of view, it's a little bit hard to follow. So if we try and follow this, we know that this used to be in a while loop that only functions if the game is paused. And I did mention that before we actually commented this out, because this is a potentially important condition that is in addition to our main application loop conditions. So is paused has to be true for us to enter this while loop, but then this if statement is checking to see if it's false, but we know it's true. Therefore, this one function over here must have the ability to actually modify this boolean. Otherwise, there's just no way that this would ever be true, meaning is paused would be false. So since game UI can unpause the game, presumably meaning probably by hitting the start button or the play button, you can see that if the start button is clicked, current state is game and paused is false. So in this case, this becomes false and we jump into this section once. But because the game is now no longer paused since we are playing it, that means that we will never enter this menu state again. I mean, another thing that this function did is actually change the current state. So now we're also in kind of a weird position where this game UI, which is part of the render module, because I guess UI is rendering, even though this is like very, very deep game logic. Like it's literally the state machine that controls what the application is actually doing. It's in the render module, which is weird. But again, I get it. It's just that this architecture and design is kind of falling apart at this point. And this is now false. So we're going to go ahead and either create a new game if it just has never existed, or if it has already existed, presumably because we played the game before, it's going to delete the old one and recreate the new one just so that we get like all of our variables reset, and we're basically going to reset our entire game state in memory, which is fine. That's totally fine. And then since we are no longer in the paused kind of menu state, we'll come down here and then that's it. We'll be back in the game state. So you see how like this is a very specific block of code that clearly only happens like once, but because it's in a while loop and then GameUI.update is what can actually trigger this, it feels like, just implicitly feels like this is potentially running every iteration of the while loop, or at the very least repeatedly, more than once, even though it's clearly designed as a condition that gets only triggered once, like a one-shot thing that's just like do this once and then that's it, you'll change into something else. In fact, you can see that the game UI also sets the game state here to game, even though game UI update also sets the current state to game. So this is also kind of a doubling up of things, and this is where things are beginning to become messy, and this potentially unintentional doubling up of setting the game state to something else could be a consequence of this design and architecture, again, starting to fall apart a little bit. What do you guys think of this? Rather than doing the entire code review here within this video and then it being super long, I'm going to leave it here and ask you guys to think about the current problem we have at hand. What would you do to improve it? My goal with these code review videos is not just for entertainment and roasting, it's also to be educational for people who are learning programming or might just not be experienced in a particular area of programming. And this single main file that we've looked at today actually tells a pretty deep story about how this entire application is architected. I want you to think about all of the problems, all of the potential issues that come from this, why it might create certain pain points and architectural weaknesses, and also what you would actually do to improve it. For those who are interested in participating in this discussion, I've made a brand new code review channel on my Discord server. An invite link to that specific channel and my Discord server will be in the description below. As I mentioned earlier in the video, this repository will be linked in the description below so you can have a look at all of this code. Again, specifically, we are focusing on the main file, as well as like potentially game UI might be relevant as well. So go ahead and start a discussion in that code review channel on my Discord server, and I'll be going through some of your ideas in the follow-up video to this one, as well as diving even deeper into this code and probably suggesting some of my ideas to improve it as well. If you want me to take a look at your code, then send it into chernoreview@gmail.com. That email address and some instructions will be in the description below. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, leave your thoughts in the comment section below, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.